Hello, did you come from the last video? Welcome back to the Educatedcollins Snap channel. How you doing? So we are following up with the Series 5 buy list. Just like the Series 4, I do think this one is also pretty interesting, where you want to spend your resources. First things first, I actually don't think you should be spending most of your tokens on Series 5 cards right now, just because of the way the spotlights work. A lot of times, if you can use your spotlights efficiently, you can get multiple Series 5 cards for a pretty good rate. So it's a lot better to use them for Series 4. I would say that's the preferred method. However, the issue with doing that is there's going to be some weeks, some months where you maybe have one Series 5 that you really want, and it's not available for a month, 2 months, maybe even longer. And then at that point, maybe you want to be using your tokens on it just to be able to use it early. So that'd be the reason. But generally, I would say it's better to use your tokens on Series 4 cards. But there's definitely going to be some cases and some cards in particular that makes sense to use on Series 5. So let's get started. So once again, I have the list of the Series 5 cards. The list is a little bit bigger, so everything looks a little smaller. And we have more tiers as well, which also makes things a little bit smaller. But overall, we shall get started. And first tier is the nothing tier. Unfortunately, nothing goes in this tier except Jeff. Because nothing can stop Jeff. And I just think Jeff is the best Series 5 card right now to spend resources on. I just think it's super flexible, super strong, fits in a lot of different compositions, and it's really a card you're always going to love having. It's been a journey, because when Jeff came out, right, there was a lot of people who said, okay, this card's good, not spending resources on. And it was a fair take to say, oh, don't spend resources on. I was just thinking that I didn't mind getting Jeff like 2 months early. You know, that was my thought. And now we're like 3-4 months later. Jeff is still Series 4. And that buy looks pretty good now. But there is Jeff coming out in a spotlight next month, in September. So if you have enough resources to get Jeff through that spotlight, I would save up and get it that way. I think it's better to use your spotlights to get the 6,000 token cards than to use your tokens. So if you can save up 4, maybe you're lucky you get it earlier, but you know, best case scenarios you save up 4, then I would prefer you use your spotlights to get Jeff, even if you can't, even if the other 2 options are not useful for you, I would still get Jeff anyways. I think it's that good. So that is the caveat. However, if you don't have the 4 spotlights, or you just have 6,000 tokens and you don't care, I think Jeff is the best card to get. I think it's very flexible, very useful, has a lot of builds, paths, and is a card that we'll always see play. And I also don't expect it to be dropped down. I just don't think it's a card that secondary will be like, oh yeah, you know what, everyone wants Jeff, let's drop it down. I don't see that happening. So I just think it's, you know, big bad level, better than big bad level. It's its own tier, the Jeff tier, you know. So that's the card I would be very much looking forward to you getting. But still think there's lots of other cards worth picking up, but that is the one I have at the top. Next up is staple cards. So these cards are pretty strong, pretty good, and don't mind you picking them up as well. I initially had something else in here, but I was thinking about it and it was like, it's not the same. They're not the same tier. So first up, we do have High Evolutionary. So High Evolutionary still came out, basically dominate the meta for such a long time. Then other cards came out and it's dropped down a little bit, but it's still really powerful, still really played. You can play lots of different decks with it, and it's very powerful. So still a staple in the meta. You will be seeing people play High Evolutionary decks, and it's just flexible, strong, fun, gives you a lot of options, and that's really what you're looking for. It's also a big bad, which honestly right now big bads don't have as much of a benefit as they used to, because The difference between a big bad Series 5 and a regular Series 5 with the spotlight system is pretty negligible, I would say. So it really doesn't matter whether it's a big bad or not. You could maybe argue in the future these cards are not dropping down, but right now nothing's dropping down, so that argument doesn't really matter. But generally, I would say High Evolutionary, good card. If you want to get it, I would still say yes, get it. Next up we have is Thanos, actually. So Thanos is also a big bad. Yes, I do have two big bads next to each other. And I was just talking about how big bads don't matter. But Thanos is a good card. And it's a card that periodically jumps back into the meta because its tools are so flexible. So there will be metas where Thanos can do a lot for you. The Time Stone, I would say, is one of the most unique cards that Thanos has access to. And then the Reality Stone is another really unique card that Thanos has access to, as well as the Soul Stone, but not as much as the Reality and Time Stone. And those really just give Thanos a lot of flexibility, as well as it being able to make different decks that you can't make without, like, that you can't build if you don't have Thanos. So Thanos, just like High Evolutionary, if you don't have, there are just going to be some meta, some deck builds that you do not have access to at all. You have no way to build a similar deck list because the tools they give you are just completely unique to Thanos. So it's always a card to have in your arsenal if you like playing different decks, if you like playing flexible decks. Recently, right, we had that Thanos control meta just jump out of nowhere and everyone's playing Thanos control. That kind of stuff, if you don't have Thanos, you can't really participate in. So it's always good to have this card. Still very strong and something I wouldn't mind you getting if you're a big Thanos enjoyer. And the next two we're going to talk about kind of fill a very similar niche. I do have these in order. So it's Jeff and then High Evolutionary and then Thanos. So it's in order, so keep that in mind. But next two is the 2 1-drops. I think those are also very, very strong. We have Kitty Pryde and Nebula. I do think Nebula is a little bit better than Kitty Pryde right now because once again, Kitty Pryde did get nerfed, so it lost a little bit of its power, a little bit of its usability. And I just think Nebula is more flexible right now, plays in more decks or more deck varieties. You could argue that Kitty Pryde there's more Kitty Prydes in the meta, but I would say you can play more decks with Nebula, and they both have very strong 1-drops that fulfill their roles very well. One of the best 1-drops you can pick for both types, and just really powerful staples that you see in every meta. So definitely Nebula, Kitty Pryde, I think are also very, very worth picking up if that is what you're looking to do as well. So there's definitely some different types of builds you can pull with each of them. Nebula is more of a set and forget, where you just play it and then maybe your opponent contested, but a lot of times they have to do other things. They have to fight other lanes, so you get a 3-power card, a 5-power card, or better, especially if you have synergy. And then Kitty Pryde is something you can actively play with. It synergizes with Bishop, it synergizes with Angela, it synergizes with a lot of other little cards that just gives it some usability. And there are also some powerful locations that Kitty Pryde really works well with. So there's just a lot of little active gameplay decisions you can do with Kitty, when Nebula is more of I said it once and I forget it, and then it just gives me power passively. So both cards very strong. I think Nebula is more flexible, more used right now with the Kitty nerf, but they're both still very strong cards that are staples, and I wouldn't mind you spending resources on getting them. Obviously, a lot of people get Kitty Pryde for free, so don't have to worry too much. But if you don't and you're like, ooh, I'm missing the Kitty Pryde, and you want to spend your resources on it, I think that's perfectly fine to do. Now, next up, these cards are useful, flexible, or fun. They're just cards that have multiple different deck builds and are pretty good. They're flexible, and they can be fun to play for different types of people. So the first one we have is Galactus, and then you're gonna like, fun? What do you mean? Flexible fun? But honestly, yes, Galactus is a card you could argue is fun for a lot of players, right? It used to be one of the most popular deck types for a reason, because people liked destroying all their locations, having no counterplay, Spider-Man on top, you got nothing to do, you just have to sit there as the Galactus player smiling down upon you while you have to retreat, right? And some people like that, you know, some people find that fun. And, you know, you can still kind of do that. Obviously, it's a little bit less. There's no Spider-Man lockdown. And it's a lot harder to force the Galactus play if your opponent is not thinking about it at all, right? There has to be some active decision making to make Galactus work. But still has the same fantasy of playing Galactus down. You can still kind of do the same low annoyance if you want, and it's still a flexible deck list. People are playing it with Nimrod, people are playing with Destroyer, people are playing with the Goblin, so there's little deck builds you can do, and it still has good, like an okay play rate, okay win rate, not crazy, wouldn't be the win rate of anything above, but still an okay deck list, and I would say I can reliably put it here. And then next up we have Iron Lad. So Iron Lad's a card that honestly I think was overhyped when it came out. Though I think it was good, but there was definitely a lot of people saying this card would completely dominate the meta. There was just too much synergies. And I could see where they're coming from as well. The ability to just create some stupid combos with some particular interactions, which they haven't changed at all, which I thought they would have adjusted some of the interactions, like copying it 3 times with Brood. I thought was like crazy, but it hasn't really changed. So you still have these high roll potentials. It did get a little bit weaker with the Dr. Doom nerf, in my opinion, because Dr. Doom was one of the best hits for Iron Lad, but that was reduced. So you don't see as many people playing Iron Lad Dr. Doom. It's still there. The deck still functions, but it's just a lower power ceiling or for that. So it's a little bit weaker, but overall there are still some cards that do really, really well with Iron Lad. And it's a card that will get better with time as more cards are being added to the game. There's going to be more broken interaction with Iron Lad, and eventually you're going to have a point where every hit is broken, and then you're just like, "Whoo, okay, this is just a slam dunk deck decision." So it's a card that is useful, flexible. It's also a very fun card, so definitely fits here. And there's something, if you really like Iron Lad, then feel free to play with it. And then the last card in this particular list here will actually be dun dun dun. What do you guys guess? Right? What do you think is here? It's gonna be Silk, actually. So this one I also think is a little bit surprising to me, because my initial impressions of Silk was okay, but not really something you spend resources on. However, there have been some adjustments since it came out that have made it a little bit better. The Spider-Man change helps it in its deck builds. There's a lot of builds where Spider-Man, Silk, Miles Morales is like a combo in there, and you can really do a lot of damage with that. So because of this is a card that's gotten better because of, I guess, deck designers' creativity and making decks that use Silk and not be a huge weakness. Because a lot of times when you're playing Silk, what the issues that arise was that Silk would always move, and as long as your opponent has priority, they can always force your Silk to be in a lane, not in a lane they want. They can always force that. So it always felt like Silk was going to be moving in a location you didn't want and was not providing you the power in the places you need. However, 2 energy, 5 power is just very strong, and with synergies that can make just playing it strong, just like Angela synergy, Craven synergy, and just being able to move over and over, it just made playing this card a 2/7, a 2/9, and that is just really, really good stats for 2, right? So it made the card feel worth it, and a lot of decks now can just add Miles as well, and just have these really safe, very powerful tempo plays in the early game, which is really nice in a lot of locations and a lot of games. So Silk moved up because of that, and now I think it's barely in the cuff of being worth spending your resources on. If you really want Silk and that's the missing piece, then I would say, yeah, you can get it. Now, there is Silk coming up, I believe, so maybe you can get it that way. But if that has passed, you're watching this a little bit later, definitely think Silk is a pretty good card to pick up at the moment. Now, these are the cards I'm okay with you spending your tokens on. These 8 cards. After this, I would say you got to be really careful with the rest of your purchases. All the cards they're not bad cards, but I would say they're either expensive or niche, or they're not worth spending your resources on. You maybe want to wait and see if there's any of them drop down or anything like that. But yeah, overall, these are the ones I'm looking at. Afterwards, not recommended. But we'll go through all the rest of them here. So the first one in strong but expensive would be Hitmonkey. I think this card is strong. It did get nerfed. It was a 2/2, moved to a 3/2. It's a little bit weaker now, but you can still play this in usually Sarah decks, Sarah control, or just bounce decks as well can still run it. But since the nerf, it's just not as popular and the payoff isn't as high, and you're not really forced to run this card anymore. Before the nerf, I would say this was one of the strongest decks, and it was a staple. If you didn't have Hitmonkey, it just didn't feel the same. Now, you still run it. It's just not as broken. A lot of times you're able to play Hitmonkey earlier in the game, like turn 4 with Mysterio, and it was just like a power play. Now, you really have to wait until you use all your resources, and it's just not as consistent as it used to be. So it's still a good card. Like, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just expensive now in terms of the payoff, and maybe you're better off using your resources on something else. And the next one here in the strong expensive is Ghost Spider. So Ghost Spider was initially a 2/3 in terms of the stats, but was moved down to 1 cost, and I think that helped it a lot in terms of where you can play this. It fit and move a lot better. It was just the nice alternative there, and people still play with it. I just think it's expensive as well. It's interesting because both of these cards are series pass cards, and maybe that's affecting my judgment a little bit, right? Because a lot of people got it for free, and if you're paying 6,000 tokens for a series pass card, it feels kind of bad. But I do think it's playable, but the play rate is not that high. Its win rate is solid, so it's a strong card, but it's not something that's giving you a lot of deck design, a lot of flexibility. It's really used in move decks. I really thought it would be used as like a counter to Shang-Chi, but I actually don't think Shang-Chi is being played as much right now, that having the Ghost Spider tech is like the way, to really win that matchup. So it is something you can do, but I wouldn't say it is necessary or even super effective to use Ghost Spider in as a Shang-Chi tech. So those are the 2 strong but expensive cards, and then we're moving on to the niche cards. So these niche cards aren't necessarily bad, but there's really 1, maybe 2 decks that you really play these cards in, so they don't really shine too much. First up, we're gonna have Living Tribunal. So Living Tribunal did get a buff, moved up from a 6/6 to a 6/9, which is a nice buff for it, but it's still kind of a hard card to play. Generally, you need to build completely around Living Tribunal, or you're building like a hella deck with Living Tribunal as an extra power play. And that's the issues with those type of decks, is you are pretty reliant on your key cards, and you usually have 1 way to win. And if you don't draw that 1 card, which is usually going to be 25% of the games, you're already on the back foot. And then also, if they counter that 1 win condition or the locations mess you up, then you're also kind of screwed. So it's just not always consistent. Now, thanks to being able to snap and stuff, you can really mitigate that and still have the deck perform well. But generally, on average, it's not going to be the craziest win condition for most players. So that's the issue with Tribunal. Still a good card. It just has those weaknesses that I did just go through. Next up, we have Kang, I believe. So Kang, the lowest of the big bads. The card isn't technically bad. It's slow though, and not always a win condition. So those are the kind of the main issues. It's just a card that makes your games longer. Just generally, if you're going to play Kang, your games are longer, by like 30-40%, which is very meaningful, especially if you're trying to climb and you just care about getting games done. This is not helping you. Like, you'd be faster if you just didn't play the card, which is a little bit rough. Conquest mode, that's a little bit arguable, where it can be useful. The only downside is like against other like knowledgeable players, you get to use the effect once, and then people know what you're doing, right? And then it loses its value. But that first time you use it, it's really powerful. So as long as you're using that very correctly, it can be a very good, effective tactic to play in Conquest. Now, the power itself isn't necessarily all that it's cracked up to be a lot of the time. Sometimes you just lose a draw. A lot of the times you can mitigate that if you play it as soon as you get it on turn 5, turn 6. But a lot of times you're losing a draw, so you have less options, and you need a deck that can work with drawing less consistently, which a lot of decks can't really do that. They need all their draws since draws are important. So you get a weaker deck a lot of the time, and with the payoff of sometimes you can psych your opponent out. So it's pretty niche in that way of you can't really put this in every deck and feel happy about it. There are definitely some decks where it shines more than others, but it's more of like your how much you're willing to take, right? How much deck inconsistency you're willing to have to play disadvantage. So it's a card that can work for you, but it just has a lot of niche situations where it shines, and I can't really recommend you spending your resources on it. And then the next one, last one, we do have Phoenix Force. So Phoenix Force, once again, I also think it is playable. It is fine. But really, right now, the most common use of it is with multiple man, which I think is fine. Like, that deck is pretty good. If you hit the nuts, you could definitely destroy some people. Just, like, absolutely destroy some people with it. It's just, like, there's not a lot of other uses people are using with the card right now. Now, I do think that can change, and I do think maybe with X23 and there's more destroy metas in the game, maybe there's going to be more Phoenix Force decks. But right now, I wouldn't necessarily say it's super common that you're playing Phoenix Force and not being like, oh well, it's doing that much for me. Like, is it worth my tokens? Maybe not. So that's the issue here. I do think there are some use cases, especially with multiple man, but it's pretty niche. There was a lot of Phoenix Force play last month, but that was just due to the weekend missions. I assure you, it was not because people were like, damn, Phoenix Force is kicking my butt and I'm gonna play it. It was just like, I need my tokens, I need my gold. So wouldn't recommend using your tokens on it, though I don't think it's a bad card. So that's the issue here. And then I would say maybe after this point, these cards I think are a little bit bad. But for the rest of these are just lackluster cards, not worth resources, doesn't shine. Not that they're bad, but they just don't do enough to be worth 6,000 tokens. I guess is the best way of putting it. So first card we have here in this list will be Echo. So Echo, I think there might be some people here who are like, Echo's a great card, I like it, and I use it, and blah blah blah. And I don't think Echo's a bad card generally. It's just that you're not always getting to use Echo in a positive way. In that a lot of decks don't run ongoings that Echo can take advantage of. Is maybe what I'm trying to say. So you're gonna have Echo, and in a lot of games, it's gonna do nothing for you. You're playing Conquest, they're running on reveal decks. So like Cosmo is a lot more efficient because there's so much on reveal in the game, where ongoings that Echo can take advantage of is significantly lower because you have to kind of predict where the ongoing is on the turn it goes down, because if you play Echo, they're not going to play their ongoings there a lot of the time. And if you're trying to, let's say, snipe Iron Man, that means you can't play a 5-drop, right? You're playing Echo plus a 4. So your deck has to be designed where you can play lower cost cards, and then the Echo can slot in a lot of different turns where it needs to fit to counter that play. And you also have to guess correctly where they're going to play their on reveal. And, you know, it can still get killmongered and destroyed early if you try to tempo it out early. So there's just a lot of little caveats to this card that just make it hard to say, oh yeah, this is a great card. Now, I don't think it's bad cards, but that was a lot of downsides to it to make it work out for you. So there are some decks, probably Silver Surfer decks probably have the best case for it, but generally I wouldn't say this is a card I would spend my resources on, and that's where I struggle to have a positive light on it. And then next up we have Jean Grey. So Jean Grey was super hyped, super duper hyped, and it was super broken with Goose. I agree. Super broken with Goose, where it just locks you down from playing 4 or 5 cards at all. But they changed that, they fixed that. Now it's just a more average card. The stats aren't super great. 3/3 isn't super good. And a lot of decks don't care about Jean Grey's effect. A lot of people are playing Kitty. They don't care. A lot of people are playing move cards. They don't care. And a lot of people are playing just able to fill and then have a goose, not a goose, have a Jeff in that lane, and then last turn they can just move the Jeff and fill that lane with power if they need to. So there's just a lot of ways to get around the Jean Grey, which makes it not feel as powerful as it could be. So it's just not something I would spend my resources on right now. Maybe with a different meta, it'd be a little bit better. But at the moment, I just think you have better tools, better things to spend your resources on than a card that doesn't always help you. Now, you can play ongoing decks, and maybe that can use that pretty well, but generally, those are also pretty niche decks, so wouldn't necessarily say, oh, this is the way to do it. A lot of times you're playing this in Silver Surfer, but Silver Surfer has so many options. So many options. They keep getting more options. So Jean Grey, I would say, doesn't really fit the cut right now in Silver Surfer decks to be really worth 6,000 tokens. And then the last card in Lackluster is the new card, Lady Deathstrike. Now, I have to have a caveat here in that X23 has not come out, and that does matter. And I do think next week, this could be like here, very likely that could be here. Because the problem there is that the spotlight will already have passed, right? So, you know, unless it's like dominating, which is maybe unlikely, it's very likely that it could just be here if there is a deck that does shine with both cards in. But right now, I would say it's pretty lackluster. Its stats are very bad, honestly, and there's no deck that's really meaningfully good with it. I would say you could argue that Thanos decks are doing well with Lady Deathstrike, but Thanos decks do well with everything. One card doesn't affect a Thanos win rate because they have all these stones that are diluting the card draw pool, and so many times you'll just play the game out playing Thanos and you'll never draw the Deathstrike, so it doesn't affect you at all. So you can't really use Thanos decks as a benchmark for any specific card. You can use it as a benchmark for the deck as a whole, but not for any particular card realistically. So it's hard to say, oh yeah, you can play this in Thanos. You can play anything in Thanos, right? Like, you'll never draw the card. So not really a good argument there. But overall, it's just not doing well. A lot of people are trying to get in negative. It's not doing well. A lot of people are trying to get in regular destroy. It's not doing well. And a lot of people playing Thanos decks. That one's fine, but you know, we went over it. So these stats just don't give it hope right now. Now, I do think X23 does change a lot, right? It means that you'll be able to play Lily Deathstrike earlier, and you'll also trigger your X23. Now, the downside with that is it's maybe forcing where you play the X23, which could be a little bit bad. But still, you still have that freedom to kind of synergize there, and that could definitely be a big play pattern for it. So we'll have to see. So there's definitely an asterisk with this one in particular, where it actually might be better after X23 comes out. But for now, I would say it's definitely in lackluster territory. And the last card, the only card I would say not worth your resources, is Howard the Duck. Really think this card has nothing really going for it right now. It was argued that it would synergize very well with Iron Lad, but a lot of people just came to the conclusion Iron Lad just works. Like, just build your deck around Iron Lad, so you don't need to know what it hits. And when you're playing Iron the Duck, it's Howard the Duck. It's a 1/2, doesn't do that much for you. Maybe it makes your Jubilee pool more consistent, but a lot of times, like, you're not. Doesn't matter. Maybe it helps your Lockjaw, but like you have to play a bad card to make it run. A lot of people just build their decks where all their pools are good. Like, that's the way to do it. Just make your deck, make the pools good on average, so you don't have to know what you're pulling. And that's really how you get around that. And it just means that Howard the Duck just doesn't do much for most players' decks. So just not worth your resources, especially for 6,000 tokens. Even 3,000 tokens, I would be struggling to argue for it. So just think it's the one card I'm just like this card could definitely be moved to Series 3 and would be perfectly fine. So don't really have a lot of good things to say for it. But overall, even this bottom section is just not something I would be looking towards. I would just look towards this top 8 cards. These are the ones where you have the seal of approval. I think you're fine spending resources on these. The bottom ones, not so much. So wow, this is why we split it into 2 videos, because damn, look at that, 30 minutes. All right, whatever. Anyways, that is the Series 5 buy list. What's your thoughts? Do you agree with this? Do you think Jeff should actually be here? It's too expensive. Nah, you're trolling. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.
Educatedcollins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you tomorrow snap. Your skills will be improved.